I'll start the recording there then. This week is, again, another one of those hodgepodgey-ish kind of weeks because there's so many random little topics to continue covering here. I think what we are going to start with, though, is lighting, because at this stage in the game, we haven't touched on it at all. So we've got some basic lights in the scene, and I need to change this so my computer doesn't crash. We've got some basic lights in the scene so far, just to get a general idea of what's going on. But the next most important part of our scene is going to be lighting. It carries way more weight than you think. A great scene, model-wise, texture-wise, everything like that, if it's lit poorly, it's gonna look bad every single time, okay? And if you throw a bunch of trash into a scene, terrible models, not textured properly, and you light it well, it's still gonna look good. So this is a really key, important part. I'm gonna teach you just one simple way to sort of go about lighting. It's a tried and true technique, following warm to cold. So the first thing that we want to do whenever we're lighting is make sure that we get rid of everything possible. We want to start from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to a new window called the light mixer. So in Unreal, if you hop up, and you can't really see because all the lights are on. In Unreal, if we hop up to window, we're going to see light mixer, and this is going to be your best friend when you're doing lighting. So we're going to open this up, and you'll see it's going to add a bunch of lighting things, basically, right? It tells you where your lights are. It quickly allows you to add new ones, so this is a great tab to have. I'm going to just put this over here to the side and nab it in beside my outliner. If ever I'm working on my lights, right, I can move to the light mixer and it'll just hide everything that's basically not a light. So now I don't have to worry about scrolling through thousands of things to try and find my lights. I know they're all right here. Okay. There is another one as well called the environment light mixer. You'll notice that in my light mixer here, I'm missing all of my sky box and my ambient lighting stuff. So under window, you'll also want to come down to environment light mixer and open that one up as well. And here you have easy access to your directional light as long as it's set up as the sun. You have easy access to your skylight and everything else. So I'm going to put this one to the side. If you have a second monitor, it makes this a lot easier. But with the game settings option turned on here for now in our view, I'm going to go ahead and just nuke everything that I possibly can think of. So this directional light, I'm going to delete it. And just make sure we don't have any lighting here. Come into the sky atmosphere, and I want to just do the same thing basically. I just want to make sure that none of this stuff is affecting my lights right now. So I've also got a volumetric cloud and an exponential height fog. We're just going to get rid of those as well. Sky atmosphere, sky light, there we go, volumetric cloud. Okay, we want to start with nothing. So now both inside and out of my scene, I've got absolutely nothing going on, which is exactly what we want, so we can start from scratch. Now, depending if you're doing an indoor or outdoor scene, these steps are going to look a little bit different. If I'm doing an indoor scene, I'm still going to want something like an environment light, but that detail is going to be less relevant. Same with something like a directional light. So I'll come into my scene here. At least I'm pretty sure I'm inside of it now. And just to get started with a little bit of visibility, I'm just going to add some kind of basic spot or rect light. So I'll come in with a rectangular light just to get started. And we'll start to think about our kind of main light setup. I don't have any pictures, but one easy way to light any scene and have it look decently good is a warm to cool light setup, and we'll see if it kind of shows up here. But the main idea basically is that we use, wow, this stinks. The main idea is that we use warmer lights kind of in the front or cooler lights in the front, and then we transition into warmer lights in the back or cooler lights in the back to try and set a tone. So this being a pretty cozy setup for works well for most scenes. Obviously, if you're doing something a little bit more haunted, you'd probably lean more into using a lighter blue and then a colder blue in the back. But the idea is we're creating some kind of depth to our scene with the light. It's kind of hard to tell in a picture like this, but this does work in real life as well. You can see that all of the light coming in from what I assume is a massive window here is casting this cool light on all of the props in the foreground of the scene. And as we get back, we're kind of getting the warm light coming off from all of those artificial sources. So it creates this nice gradient. It really makes our scenes feel like they have some depth. And so it works pretty well in games as well to sort of fake, hey, this is where our lights are coming from. It can also make your scenes feel much larger. If you're doing a scene like a room that's sort of touching outside, for example, having that cool light coming in from the sun kind of indicates, even if we can't see it from the camera, hey, there might be a massive window here, or hey, there might be a lot more room out in this direction that we can't actually see. So that's a trick they use in Ubisoft Next sometimes. You only have 10 feet by 10 feet, so all these kind of tricks, it makes the room feel a lot bigger even though it isn't actually in scene, or 10 meters, sorry. So to get started, thinking compositionally, I'm just gonna start moving this light around here. And I know I want one light focusing on the bar. So the bar is going to be an important part of my scene. Your scenes will have some important part of their own. For me, this is what I'm most interested in lighting first and foremost, and then we'll kind of work around it for everything else. So with the rectangle light here, I'm going to just increase the width of it. Oops. And I want it to kind of cover the length of the bar just to get started. We'll add this as like a main light, and we'll have some secondary lights and stuff that come in kind of where these coves are. So we'll kind of drop this in here. Now you are going to want usually light sources somewhere where the light is actually coming from. And those lights in Unreal typically are going to be your main sources. Is anyone familiar with the way Lumen works as opposed to the way UE4 worked with the lighting? Okay, so one key difference with the way Lumen is because it's all path tracing, using lights like this one are actually quite inefficient, because if you add a bunch of them into the same space, you're going to get what's called light overlap, and light overlap causes incredible rendering stutter. It is very bad. So the way Lumen works is emissive surfaces actually cast light with rays, which they normally don't do nearly as much. So if you have lights in your scene like a light bulb and you give it an emissive material in older versions of Unreal, in Unity, that light bulb will not actually light your scene up. It will just cast its little emissive bits, and that might show up on your baked shadow maps or your baked global illumination. In Lumen, that emissive will actually real-time light the scene. So we don't have any lights in the scene currently. I'm gonna just place a few, and then we'll start thinking about actual physical lights. If I had a chandelier here, for example, that is something that would work really well with an emissive to light the scene. So let's get started with this for now, and I just wanna use this to kind of highlight the bar. And I don't want it to be too bright. The goal here, just like anything else we've done up until this point, is we want to subtly build up our scene using lights rather than just cast one giant light all at once, right? So maybe if you're doing a space scene, you would want just one directional light and then you'd call it a day. But for most purposes, we're going to be using a bunch of little lights to try and build up our scene with some depth. So we'll get started with this. I might drop it down even less just to get kind of started here. And then we can see where else we can sort of tweak. So I know I'm going to have a stairway here at some point coming down beside the bar. So I'll just make a little opening for that over to the side. And we'll have some kind of doorway or something in there eventually. So I might come in here, and just to kind of visualize that, drop a second light in and kind of move it over here to the side. Okay. At this point, now that I can actually see everything, I'm going to turn off my game settings and pick an exposure value that I think works for the scene. Lowering your exposure setting will increase the amount of light coming in. It works the same as a real camera. So we can pick some value that feels good. And I think this gives us a pretty good starting point. Okay, so we're thinking about kind of the general composition here. Might even start kind of coming in and adding more of these blocks. I'm going to add these as stairs, quote unquote, but it's just going to be some rotated cube with some cubes to the side. Not worried about texturing this or nothing. This will be textured and everything later. Right now, we just want to get general ideas in place. I could pretend this is a stairway or something that would be leading in. Okay. And we'll cast this down. Okay, so now we can start to get a feel of what we're actually kind of looking for here. At this point, I've got an idea of my composition. Ideally, you've already got something kind of worked out for your composition as you kind of play with your scene. I don't have a fantastic one since the scene, we didn't really spend a lot of time making a good footprint for our scene. So I'm gonna go ahead and just say that this is sort of where I want my stuff to be. The next thing we want to do as we kind of get into this process is thinking ahead to your final presentation of this. And so in order to actually present this, you're going to need cameras in scene. We want to present this probably in two ways at the end, one being with a playable character and then the other being with some kind of real-time render done via an actual camera in Unreal. So I'm going to start adding a camera in here, and we can get a few different shots of our scene and see how the lighting works in every one of those situations. So let's just pop in here, and I want a cine camera actor. You can use just the regular camera as well. I just find these ones to be a little bit nicer, and they have the default setup with the black bars. So we're just going to move this around, and you'll notice that the actual camera view is not really seeing much at all. We do also have to tell the camera actor, hey, our target exposure value is going to be -5 here. So just go ahead and jump onto the camera. We'll lift this up and kind of go through. So Unreal cameras work the same as real life cameras. I don't know, have any of you done photography? Is that something any of you are familiar with? That doesn't surprise me. Yeah, Eric, you kind of done it too? Okay. So all of these settings should be pretty familiar to you. If you've used real cameras, all of your resolutions and cropping settings, focal length, aperture, all work the exact same way they do on physical cameras. These are physically based cameras, just in engine. So one thing I want to go in here and do, the first thing is just find that exposure value. Exposure compensation. No, sorry. Min and max EV. This sets the low bounds and high bounds of your exposure value. So normally it's dynamic, and as you introduce more or less light to a scene, it will change. Now, this is something that you may want on your actual game character. Let's say they walk out of a really bright outside space and they walk into this really dark indoor space, right? The exposure value kind of works the same way as your eyes do, right? If I turned off all the lights in this classroom and told you to put your head down like this and just stare into the desk for like an hour, when you walked outside, you'd be flashbanged. And then your eyes would slowly adjust until you can start seeing again. It's the exact same thing here. So for your game cameras, for your characters, you probably want some level of that so the player can actually see in all the different environments. But for our purposes here, we're making dedicated renders and dedicated scenes. We want to have control over this entirely. So I'm just going to set the min and max to the exact same thing. -4, which is the same value that we kind of picked here. Actually, we picked -5, so -5 it is. Okay, but now this camera value, it will match what we're actually seeing in our viewport here, which is really good because it means we don't need to constantly be tied to the hip to our camera to make sure that everything looks good. So now we can get a good idea. So I'm going to go into unlit mode here just to help me sort of move things around the scene a little bit better. The camera still renders here. but we're not quite in place. So I'm going to grab everything. And right now, I'm not getting enough of the scene, so I do need to increase the focal length, decrease the focal length. And I'm just going to drop it around 20. Sometimes you might find that, hey, this little window I'm looking at is kind of annoying. I want to look at what my camera is actually seeing. You can actually, up here, you'll notice that when you use the cinema cameras, I don't know if this works for the default cameras too. It probably does, but I know for a fact it does with the cinema cameras. I now have access to a cine camera view where I can just look through my camera's lens as if I am the camera, right? And I'm not only looking through it, I'm piloting it. So if I start to move around in my scene with the right arrow and WASD, I am moving my camera actually. So I can now pilot my camera right into a view where I think it has a nice composition. If I'm unsure about my composition, I can even go turn on the frame, which I'm forgetting exactly where that is, but you can turn on the frame for either, there's a cross mode for center focus, and there is a thirds mode for using the rule of thirds, which is normally really useful stuff, except I forget where the button is to do it. You'll have to just believe me on that one and find that, but it is there as an option. Okay, we'll move on though. So with a pretty decent composition sort of set up here, I'm thinking about, hey, how much do I have to work with in my foreground and my background? We don't have any foreground or background props at the moment, so we'll just kind of have to imagine where they would be, right? I'm thinking if this is a scene with a bar, I'm probably going to have maybe a railing here. I might have chairs or something, things that are pretty low. So if I want them to be in my foreground, I can't have the camera up too high. And I want to indicate that there is something more up here, but without actually showing it. So I just want to give it kind of a taste of like, hey, there's stairs there. What's going on? And I'm pretending that there's a rule of thirds here that you can't see, but it kind of puts my main part of the bar here in a focal point, and then this part in the other focal point. So I'm going to exit the camera. It's in a happy spot. I'm just going to hit stop piloting, boom, and there it goes. Okay, I also just remembered you have to go from default viewport to cinematic viewport in your settings. So now I can turn on my composition grids. There we go. Get a pretty good idea of my shot. This will also by default just add black bars, which might be something you want, might not be. You can see we have the different options, grid, crosshair, or a pillar setup. Okay. So switch back to default because it is more efficient, and we'll keep working on this setup. So now I want to add another light here to start to create this gradient and start to create a little bit more visual interest in the scene. So I'm going to just add a basic point light and just kind of move it into space. Maybe as like a rough representation of what a chandelier would look like if we were to have one in the scene, right? We don't have one in the scene yet, but we can always decide if this is something that works for us to go and make a chandelier later. Same goes for any other kind of light. Maybe we want like a lamp in the corner or something like that, or a lamp on each table with a low emissive value we can set up. We can check it like this and then go make those props later. So again, I want to lower this quite a bit. I'm not looking for this to absolutely blow up my scene. A value of 1 should be enough. And I'm going to increase the attenuation radius, which just means that the light travels longer, basically, quite simply. So set that to 3000 and kind of leave it there. So now we can start thinking about adding those little bits of color. I think I want to do sort of like a reverse cool to warm scene, where I might have the warm lights in the front and then the cool lights further back to indicate some kind of, you know, it breaks up the comfort that usually comes from having it the other way around. So thinking about story when doing this stuff as well, right? Like for your scene, whether it's for me or for Ubisoft Next, you'll have some kind of story. In this case, though, it's not obvious since we have like 3 props. Eventually, what I'll end up doing is come in here and add like police tape lines and everything like that to give it more of a story, right? So I don't just want a perfect bar. I want a bar where something happened. I want, this is a secret entrance. This is our prohibition bar, but this is post-raid, right? Maybe there's broken stuff everywhere. We want the scene to feel not too homey. It shouldn't feel like a welcoming space. So we'll try and set that up with our lighting as well. We'll just bring this light in close, and I'm keeping it as far away from the walls as I possibly can. I don't really want this light to have an obvious sort of point in space where it starts and ends, right? I want this to be a fill light, but it's not actually real, so I don't want it to sort of be obvious where it is. We'll hop back into our camera here. And then I'll start tweaking the lighting settings just a little bit. You don't need a lot when it comes to adding tint. Just a tiny amount goes a long way. And if I kind of add the same kind of things, but this time to the cool colors for the other side of the bar. Just copy this color and paste it. We start to evoke a lot more of that depth than we otherwise kind of had. So I'm just kind of getting an idea of where we can sort of improve. I think compositionally we do want to keep sort of a vignette, or better yet frame, our main part of the composition. So I'm not going to add, not like a vignette, like a post-processing vignette, but a vignette in the way of when we add our foreground props and everything like that, I want them to frame the main part of the scene here. So an area like this off to the side that's dark is totally fine here. It's just going to help frame the main part of the scene here that is in the light. One thing I would highly recommend doing is once you're happy with where your camera is composition wise, there's 2 more things we can do. One is going to be immediately duplicate it and just call it backup, because I guarantee you at some point you will forget you're piloting the camera and you will just start moving around, and then now your camera's in the wrong spot and you've totally messed up any of your screenshots that you were taking step by step. So if you have a backup, just hide it, don't touch it. That way, if I accidentally move this camera, I can still just switch to my backup. It has all the same settings. I don't need to worry about trying to get it back to where it was. And the other bit is, as soon as you have a decent starting point, hop into the little bar here and just hit high resolution screenshots. So this is how you're going to get all your screenshots for your scene, right? We can leave it at 1 for now. This is fine. I'm just going to hit capture. And you'll see this drops it into a folder in Unreal, but this is how we can get those progress shots that all have the exact same camera position. Is we'll just use the camera and then grab these high resolution screenshots, and you can create GIFs and other things like that to show your environment's progress. Or more importantly, I now have this, and if I start to tweak the lighting, I can look and go, okay, that worked or that didn't work, and I can directly compare it to what it looked like before without having to flip-flop back and forth between the settings a million times. One caveat is, I believe, as far as I remember, yeah, it does take that screenshot at whatever your screen's resolution is. So for me right now, that's 876 by 493, which is a little bit funky. At the end of the day, this doesn't matter too much. But if you did want to change that, you can use this multiplier. If I double it, then it would be closer to 1920 by 1080. Okay, let's make some tweaks to sort of get closer. I'm going to add at this point a environment light. I just want to add a skylight or atmospheric light just to help kind of feather in what's up here, right? We might want like God rays or something to be coming down from that space outside. So I do want to add both a sun and a skylight, though I don't really want them to affect the inside of my scene. I just want them to sort of permeate in because it would be out there, right? If this was a basement sort of bar, then it would be coming in through like a side street and there would be outside there. So if I create a skylight, by default, nothing's going to happen because it doesn't actually have any values. I also need to create a sky atmosphere and an atmospheric light, and then we can start sort of tweaking things. Right? Because our exposure value is so low, this is obviously incredibly bright, but it is kind of providing the look we want. And the last thing I'm going to do here is, I've just got a directional light. I want this light to be kind of filtering in down my stairs here so I can get rid of my like proxy that we had in here. And we'll just hop back to our camera to get a good idea. So the idea is the same as it was before. Nothing's really changed in that regard. I'll just increase the length of the stairs here. And then we'll tweak the light. Obviously, I don't want it to be this bright. So we can change it to be more of a subtle effect. And then same thing, to make this more of a nighttime kind of scene, we'll bring our values more into a cooler tone. Okay. Going back to the environment light mixture, we also have an option for environmental height fog, which helps with depth a lot. This scene is very short, so it's not going to benefit too much from height fog, since something this small, a room this small, you wouldn't really see it. Tweak things a little bit here. Then go back to our height fog. If you look very closely, you can kind of see that things further back in the scene as we increase the density are kind of taking on the color of the height fog a little bit. If you look right at the back of the bar, you might be able to see it turning a little bit blue. I'm going to just double it from the default setting. And reduce the fall off a little bit. And what that allows us to do is come into our directional light here. And we have a setting called volumetric scattering intensity. This does apply to every single one of our light, but if you've ever wondered how they get those nice little God rays in their scenes, it's by cranking up this volumetric scattering intensity, right? So basically this tells Unreal, hey, this light, it should affect my volumetrics. It should cast light onto my volumetrics. This is a bad example, but if I just like crank this up to an unbelievable amount, and then we crank our height fog up to some unbelievable amount, okay, not that much. You'll kind of see the God rays coming into play. This is obviously way too much for our scene, so we'll just kind of dial it back. Okay. Another important aspect to all of this is your post-processing settings. I don't have anything in the scene at the moment. But basically, we have to tell Unreal at some point how high quality our lights and shadows should be. And if you don't, everything is going to fall apart very, very quickly. So I'm going to add a post-process setup by adding a new volume. Post-process volume. And we can go ahead and use this to add a lot to our scene. So just fly in here. By default, it's this little box, but we can scale it up to fill our entire scene. And any cameras that find themselves within this box are going to use this volume. If you were setting up for GDW, it's much more important you create these boxes as opposed to using global volumes, because there's a good chance for every single individual scene in your game, you're going to want some different kind of effect going on with your post-processing. You're not always going to want the same thing. So let's jump back to our camera. And I'm going to punch the scalability up here, and hopefully it doesn't break everything, but just to showcase a little bit more what it's actually going to look like. Tweak this a bit. Now I'll find that post-processing again. We can start to tweak a few different settings. So our default method of everything for lighting is Lumen. I would recommend keeping it on Lumen and learning how to work with Lumen. You can switch back to the traditional ray tracing models, but you will require a totally different lighting setup in most cases when you switch, which is not fantastic. Other settings that are within post-processing, things like ambient occlusion and all of that good stuff, we'll maybe play around with this a little bit more when we get to finalizing our scenes and everything. But the key ones for right now are going to be in our lighting stuff. So I can just type lighting in here, and then everything will pop up. So okay. We have Lumen Scene Lighting Quality as a post-process setting. And this basically just directly controls how high quality all of our Lumen settings are going to be. If we find that our scenes are lagging quite a bit and you need to hit that 60 FPS target, I would recommend coming in, this is the first thing you change. Find the scene lighting quality and either cut it in half, or if you find you're having a lot more frames than you need, you can just double it. But this one is pretty big. You won't notice it when I'm just sitting here staring, but if you were to actually be playing this in your game, it will make a noticeable difference. These two down here for gather and lighting speed, increasing these will mean your scenes bounces will happen a lot faster, you'll get way less flickering, but your render time will also increase by quite a bit. I wouldn't mess with those unless you're having heavy performance issues. So because I'm on this terrible laptop and it is lagging pretty hard just doing literally anything, I'm going to just bunch this down to 0.5, and that should hopefully help our scene a little bit. Okay. Everything else in post-processing we'll leave for now. I just wanted to do that to tweak and make the scene run a little bit better. So let's look at what a lumen-based light would actually kind of look like. We don't have any props at the moment that would make sense for this. So what we're gonna do is build one. And I kind of already went ahead and did something. So I'll just delete everything here and show you that again. So at this point, your environment probably is built to a certain extent. You might have placed all your modular pieces like this. And now you want to add more props that fit the space, but you no longer really want to fiddle with making all of these measurements and checking like, hey, what's the gap between here and yada, yada, yada. So an easy way to go about making the rest of your props once you have a scene built up like this, and this is why it's going to be so quick for me to make the rest of everything in here. I'm just going to go ahead and grab basically everything that's a model here. Grab the wall too, stairs, everything else. And now that I've got all of my models selected for the scene, I'm just going to file export selected. And it doesn't really matter where you put it, just put it on my desktop. And then I'm just going to make sure that collision, by default, it's checked on. I would check that off. And level of detail, I think, is also checked on. I would check that off as well, so you're only left with these models. And when I export those as an FBX, I can import it right back into my Blender scene. Don't even have to change any settings. And now I've got the scene in my Blender one-to-one. I can delete most of the props I don't need. Maybe the floor is annoying me, so I can just come in here and quickly like combine it all into one. But really it doesn't matter because the goal here is just have a frame of reference for the rest of my props that I'm making. Not every prop, like I said, needs to be made to real world scale. We just need everything to look good in the scene together. So I'll combine all those just so it's a little bit easier on the eyes. So from here now it's super easy. If I wanted to make a fridge that fits into this space, I could just come in here, cube, and start messing with everything. And go, okay, yeah, now this fits into this space, right? This makes sense for my scene. Etc. So let's quickly make something like a lamp. Not a good one, but a lamp. Just so we have something to work with. I'll find a spot in the scene that makes sense for this kind of thing. Kind of get an appropriate height. I don't know. Surely lamps look something like this and are about this tall. Put my dude beside it just to make sure. And it looks goofy, but it should get the job done. I'll just quickly add a source for a light. and we have a lamp, quote unquote. So I'm just going to export this straight into Engine. It's not going to get the full texture treatment, but I will give it, you know, a emissive and everything that we need for rendering. Meshes. Lamp. Set this up. And then all of these settings you should be familiar with by now, but just make sure that it's combining everything, and then we're good to go. Okay. I'm gonna make a new material real quick. Just call it emissive. It's more of a test material. We're not actually going to use this anything final. And I'm just going to add quickly a color here. Actually, might as well use the parameter. And we'll just pop this into emissive. And then nothing else matters. So these I'm just doing so that the material actually renders properly. Cool. So here's our lamp. Quickly tell it to give this a different material. And now we can put our emissive material up on here. Yeah. So let's take this and crank it up. And you can see that it's actually lighting our scene the way that a real light in real life would. So you really do need to think about the physical elements that are in your scene when it comes to lighting. I would end up doing the same thing for all of the little pot lights that run around along the bottom of here as well. Rather than having full-on Unreal based lights like this, you should have some physical lights to go with it, because that's what really does bring the scene together. So don't know where these lights would realistically be in a scene like this, but I will kind of throw one over here and start to get rid of this light here. We can pretend there's one maybe in the corner. Maybe not right in the corner. And then our actual strength of our light is entirely based on the value of our emissive light. So if I crank this down to 0.5, you'll notice that our lights get a lot dimmer. And if I crank it down to a value of 0, well, now they're not lights at all. So let's go with 0.5. We'll leave it there for now. I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit here. I'm going to duplicate one of these lamps, bring it up, and just flip it upside down. And by kind of scaling it funky, this is now our chandelier. Temporarily, anyway. In real life, this would always be in the middle, but this is not real life, so I'm thinking about how this can also affect the composition. Okay, nothing too crazy or complicated so far. But that is the general idea. Another thing we can do to brighten up the scene a little bit is add some particles. I would highly recommend you do something like this as well. If you have any of the starter content, you might find some particles by default. These systems are old, these default ones, but they do typically work. If you've looked at past years' previous Ubisoft Next submissions, you will probably almost always see that they just drag and drop this ambient dust in because it adds a lot of movement to the scene without you actually having to do any work, and the movement in the scene is great. When I go through and add all of the police tape and stuff like that later, probably we'll be making that move as well. So we'll just get in here and take a quick look at everything. We've got our little dust particles floating around more or less. And I just want to tweak the settings to make it a little bit more visible, if it's even working at all. And even something like this, some kind of steam coming out from the back here, just kind of helps indicate that there's something else going on outside our scene, right? Again, the main goal here is we want to make everything feel like there's more to this scene than just what we've created here. Like, we want it to feel like this world is open and vast and there are other things going on. On these scalability settings, the dust is breaking all my reflections, so I'm just going to turn it off for now. They come back in here, right? So this is part of that lumen scene gather I was talking about. It's just sending rays in all directions, and how fast it calculates those rays is the gather. We end up with a lot of flicker because of that in certain cases. I am just going to get rid of the mirror for now, just to kind of help with that. Okay. So once we're kind of happy with this, I'm going to go back into the post-processing, and I just want to add that to vignette now. So under image effects, vignette, and I'm just going to crank this up a little bit to, again, just focus more of our scene here and here and here. And we'll have to come up with big details to put there later. Okay. One thing that's kind of off-putting here is the fact that there's literally nothing out here. Again, to sort of create that illusion that there's more stuff going on, I would recommend sort of building outside of the scene here. This would be allowed in Ubisoft Next as well, because it's not part of your scene. You are allowed to create skyboxes or background props, things like that, to help sell scenes. And because these days all of the lighting we do is physically based, you kind of need these extra pieces for the light to realistically interact with everything. So I'll put another wall somewhere down here. And you can imagine it's a sort of hallway down into a stairwell down into a scene. And we'll just adjust our direction of light here to kind of compensate for the fact that we added all those walls. All right, so we're looking much, much better than those random 4 point lights we had just sitting in the scene earlier. I'll go ahead at this stage and grab another high resolution screenshot, capture, just so you have these progress shots as you kind of go through your scene. Okay, we'll take a short break here and then I'll come back and go over sort of what happened in the async lecture, because I don't think too many people kind of watched it. I won't do the entire thing, but I will just briefly show you what was done there so you have an idea. And then, yeah, we'll do a little bit more and get out here kind of early-ish. Sound good? Cool. So I can pause this. Any questions? Resume there. Sorry, that took a little longer than expected. I want to start by going over just everything I kind of covered during that async lecture. I won't go totally in depth, but I will provide one new example and sort of redo something that was done before. So I just want to introduce a couple cubes. Just hopping the meshes here. I've got not 1, but 2 new cubes we're going to use for this. And I'll just drag them out here for now, so we can get a better look at what's going on. So one of these cubes has way more subdivisions than the other, and one of them is going to have 2 UV sets. So the async lecture was all about making materials and shaders that work for you. When we're working on stuff like this is all your first time working with Unreal, so you're probably all familiar with Unity. When you're working with Unity and you need a material for some kind of object, you make a new material, you give it some textures, and you tell Unity what kind of material you want to be instancing. But it already has all of that shader code built for you, right? So majority of the time you're just saying, Unity, hey, I would like to instance your URP standard lit. Okay. And without looking at any of the code, it just creates an instance of that shader and you change your textures. That's what makes your material. In Unreal, things are different. That code doesn't exist. You are making each. It does have rendered outputs, so Unreal still determines at the end of the day, okay, is this going to be a standard lit or is this going to have transparency? But everything between importing the texture or anything else and getting to that rendered point is something that we have to control ourselves in Unreal. So all of the stuff that we've made so far to this point, for the most part, just boils down to not even all of this, but more or less just this. You just take the 5 textures that you make or whatever, or compact them somehow into something like an RMAO, and then we just slap them into the render output. And that's fine and dandy, but we can add more control to things. So I don't remember if it was this class or if it was in the async when I did things like adding a tint, right? This is just an additional layer of control that we can use, so I can say, hey, I've got this wood, but if I want to reuse it slightly somewhere else, I could just tweak this color, press OK, and now it's slightly tinted. Maybe I should have tinted it more, right? But now I can reuse this wood slightly differently and get more variation out of it that way. So tint is another great example, an easy way to change your shader value. Okay, this stuff is fine and dandy, but that's not really where the big changes happen here. What does need to change is we need to sort of approach our projects and think about all the potential use cases for these materials or shaders, and then build up different ones for each. So the way that Unity instances the materials, where we don't really have a say, we need to create what's going to be instanced, quote unquote, and in Unreal this is what we call a master material. So this one that we use for the majority of stuff, and if you watch the async, if you didn't watch the async, this is the last thing you would have seen, because I think we built this more or less in class. It just has a slider for metallic factor and roughness and a tint, and that's it. Okay, and then afterwards I went and added tiling. But for the most part, it's pretty simple. This is great for any one-to-one prop that we're making. If I'm making a bottle or a chair or anything like that, something like this works just fine. But what about when we get into other types of props? Well, maybe this base material isn't going to work so well. If I'm texturing a large asset and I want variation, having this as my master material isn't going to offer me any flexibility. So I provided a bunch of examples in the async. I would go watch that for more types you could make. But the main 2 that I'm focusing on for this, and the main 2 I would have you kind of make if you follow along with the async, is one for RGB masking and one for vertex painting. So let's take a look at some of these. So I've got 3 different master materials here, and based on the prop that I'm working on, I'll choose one of these 3 to instance that gets me the best results. So if it's a simple prop, like I said, 1-to-1, I'm probably just going to go base PBR here. If it's something that needs more unique detail, I might go something like a base RGB mask, and I'll explain how that works in a second. Or if it's a large prop, maybe I'll go something like material blend, where I'm actually blending 2 different materials together and can paint that detail on. So just to get started, let's drop some of these on here. I'll drop material blend onto this guy. There you go. And I'll just drop the RGB mask onto this guy. At the moment, nothing really crazy special is happening just yet. So let's look at the material blend first. This master material is quite simple. You can follow along with making it in the async, but the idea behind the material blend is we're making a lot of these textures and things in Substance Designer. I've made these checkered floors, for example. You guys have made some kind of designer material, and you have a base to work with. But let's say I want my scene to be weathered, right? We talked about this is going to be some kind of scene. Maybe there was a fight here, something broke out, right? So these tiles, they shouldn't be perfect. I'm probably going to see some damage and things like that. In the class, I think I did make some rudimentary damage sort of type stuff, but here I want to accentuate that even further. So in Substance Designer, maybe here we can go in, and I'm going to go ahead and just export this as a SPS. So we can publish this SBAR. I showed this at the end. Checkered tiles. I'll publish this to my desktop really quick. And then just come into Substance Painter here. And just make a new file. It doesn't really matter what I pick. Okay. And then we can just import the checkers, S-bar, as a base material. And I'm just going to import to this current session because I'm not worried about using this for anything else. I just want to come in and create some variation with it. So we'll plop this on here. And now we have our checker material set up perfectly and tiling in Substance Painter. And here I can add some damage that's a little bit less procedural, but it still tiles, right? If I was better at Substance Designer, or if you have more time, you could do this in Substance Designer and get a better result. I don't really have the time for that though, so we're just gonna use Painter. So come in here, checkered tiles. Let's start by adding some dirt, for example. I'm just gonna come in, fill layer, classic, call it dirt, give it a black mask, and give it a generator. And we'll just use the dirt generator by default. And it's not really gonna work because we don't have any proper mesh maps. So actually I lied. I'm just gonna use a fill. And we'll find some kind of dirt texture to use. That seems like it would work well for something like this. Find the dirt, increase the balance and contrast quite a bit. We kind of know which settings this all should be affecting already. We'll up the height just a tiny smidge, just so it shows up on the normal map. Change the color a smidge. Add another one, and this one will just focus on the roughness. And add some other kind of grunge, maybe footprints, that kind of thing, something where the scene has very clearly been like walked through. I don't think there are footprints I'd have to use, yeah. So we'll just go with some kind of grunge for now. That looks like it would tile decently well in all directions. Okay, and I'm gonna make this just quite a bit rougher. Let's have that variation. And then another fill layer, last one, and then we'll just add some color variation, maybe as if there was like spilled drink or something. So add a black mask, find some kind of grunge that works for this. Obviously this is pretty rudimentary. You'd want to go tweak these a little bit more, but find something that works for stains or spills. Cool. I don't know what color beer and stuff would typically age to, but I'm assuming something brownish. And then same thing, just affecting the roughness. We'll make our stains pretty shiny. Okay, so nothing too crazy here, but we're just adding variation to our texture. We're working off the exact same base that we built in Substance Designer, but now we're adding some variation. This repeats incredibly obviously, so I'm gonna just kind of knock this down a little bit. Big old stains. Okay, and we'll export these textures as something different, a different name than our other textures. I'm trying to just break the areas where it kind of goes over the edge, because obviously those areas aren't going to tile properly. But if you can find a good balance, it won't be too noticeable. Okay. And I'm going to bring the base roughness of this up quite a bit as well. So it looks dirty, it looks grungy, it looks like it's been stepped on. So let's export these textures to the exact same place as everything else. Textures, checkered tiles, and I'm going to call these ones checkered tiles dirty. Select that. We're still just using PBR metallic roughness. I would use whatever you feel comfortable with. If you want to use RMAO maps, by all means. I'm just using these because they're easy to understand. We'll export that. Hit save. So by default, this floor is a little bit funky because it's a bunch of individual planes. Luckily, we do kind of have in Blender where I exported them all into one large chunk. So I'm just going to take this large chunk, and if I hit space, I can untriangulate. Tries to quads, it'll get rid of those. And then just looking at it, I don't know if this resolution is enough, so I might take everything, just subdivide it once. And there we go. So we can export this as our floor. Floor subdivided. Why the subdivision, right? If I'm making a floor like this, wouldn't I want it to be efficient as possible and not have a bunch of vertices? Well, we're actually going to use those vertices to store extra information about our mesh. So I'll just drag it in here, and I should just be able to zero it out, and it should be in the right spot. Perfect. So let's drag a new material. I'm going to create an instance now of my blend material. So material blend instance. We can call this MI for material instance checkers. Okay, and if we open up this instance, you'll see that we're not dealing with the entire shader. We're just dealing with the parameters that were opened up to us, which you would see if you go watch the async. So I won't explain it too much, but basically we have a bunch of texture set up for one material and a bunch of texture set up for a secondary material. So I'm going to go in here real quick, and I don't want this one to be the wood trim. I want it to be the checkers. So easy way to do this, probably to open up a tab here. We'll go checkered tiles. For material A, I'm going to go with the regular checkered tiles, so base color in, height we don't need, metallic in, normal in, roughness in. And then for the opacity mask, because we don't have one here, I'm just going to pick a white square. And then down here for material B, yep.
What happens if you clear it though?
Clear what?
Clear like the opacity mask spot.
It uses the default.
Okay.
So the default is whatever's set up in the shader, and the shader I have right now is set up by default to be the trim texture. So the default is this. So yeah, I do have to replace it with some, just, it doesn't really matter what, but some default texture.
Thank you.
Right, so you see now full opaque. So this material B now, I'm going to do the exact same thing, but instead of checkered tiles, I'm going to use the checkered tiles dirty we made. So I'll drag the new base color in, I'll drag the new roughness in, the new normal map in, metallic, and then opacity mask, obviously it doesn't matter, neither does omissive. So you can see right now our material is showing the dirty version, right? We've got a lot more roughness going on. The roughness is a little bit broken. I didn't set this to be a linear texture. No sRGB, grayscale. There you go. And if we apply this to the ground, we get our dirty material all over. But we don't want it all over. We want some unique control over our scene, and we want to have a little bit of artistic touch. So the reason we've created this variation on it, and the reason it's so good to use these designer materials, is because since they're built on the same base, they transition between each other incredibly well. And something else that transitions between itself incredibly well is vertex colors. So vertex colors, you're probably familiar with, but they allow you to add extra information to a mesh via just coloring the vertices. That data is stored in the FBX, so when you export, you can import with your vertex colors. Or the better way to do it for something like this is actually just paint it straight up within a program like Unreal. So if I look here, and I'm going to have to nuke this even further because my scene's just freaking out. There we go. Under selection mode, I can actually change this to mesh paint. And mesh paint, it gives me a brush that allows me to paint color onto the individual vertices, which is fantastic for blending materials together. So if I look at my material blend, you'll see that where I'm actually blending the two materials together, it's based entirely on the red channel of the vertex color. So you can pick any channel, but the reason that it's just showing the secondary material right now is because by default, every object has a vertex color of pure white. Right, so you can imagine if it's pure white, that means the red, green, and blue channel are sitting at 1. So red being at 1 means dirty material. So I'm going to quickly just go to the Fill tab here, change my paint color to the opposite, and just swap it to the black, hit Fill. You can see now I've got my clean material. Okay, I'm going to switch my paint color back. I don't need to paint white necessarily. Maybe I'll paint red and then use blue or green for something else, but I'll just use white because we only have one thing we're blending. And then I can change the size of my brush and everything. And you'll see if I start to paint, I am literally painting and blending that dirty material in that we made. So this gives you an incredible amount of control over your scene. I would probably want to come in and make that dirty material even more egregious than it already is, so that there's a very stark difference. And you can come in and kind of say, okay, well, there's a lot of foot traffic in this area. I should really start to kind of paint in damage and stuff there. And then kind of over here, maybe around the bar in the front where people also kind of do foot traffic things, I can change the strength and the fall off and just kind of tap it in a couple more places just to get a lot of material breakup. Same thing back here behind the bar, you know, they're probably doing a lot of walking around, so I can just increase this to 1 and sort of really hammer home that second material. You can see because of the stark contrast and the roughness values, we're reading a lot of value out of this. Like, this was a tiling texture. It was incredibly obvious that it was tiling throughout the scene. Now it's not. I've got all kind of little painted details. And you take this a step further. Maybe the blue channel, I've got a third material that's just dirt. And I can literally paint dirt onto my scene. I can get into the little nitty gritty in here. I can find the crevices like this where dirt and dust would kind of settle. And I could come in with the blue channel instead of the red channel maybe and just come in here and paint in all of these like stains and different things. So this is probably, if you were going to pay attention to anything for this bit, the most important. You can see how good this is for just creating variation and really breaking up all these tiling textures. Okay, so that's material blending, super useful stuff. There is a second type I did mention, and that is RGB masking. So essentially, though this is great, it's not great for your normal everyday run-of-the-mill props. If I have just a normal prop in the scene, like a chair, that I don't want to just slap a bunch of extra vertices on. It's very easy for me to slap a bunch of extra vertices on this because even if I do like just subdivide it, it's really not that high density, so it's not really a big deal. For something like a chair, or for these, where I've got a lot of this tight-knit topology, and the topology isn't even, right? So vertex blending does also rely on the topology being even like this. That's when I'm gonna run into issues. If I start hammering stuff home on subdividing my actual models, it won't be even and my vertex paint won't work. So what do? This is where having multiple UV channels is gonna come into play. So up until now, everything you've worked with has only had a single UV channel. But what I need you to kind of grasp and understand is everything we're working with here is just data. And the beautiful thing about Unreal and making these is that you can do literally anything you want with that data. You can make up your own data, right? We're not limited to base color, normal, roughness, etc., etc., etc. I can make whatever maps I want. It really doesn't matter. And as long as I understand and can do the math to figure out how to get it to display the way I want it to, you can build it. So this is great for those tiling textures. It gives us a lot of variation. I'm going to go find that RGB mask now. So the RGB mask now is built very similar principle to the trim sheet, except there's an additional mask here, just called RGB mask. And what this RGB mask allows me to do is create a separate texture sheet, right? So this is great for using trim sheets. We have our UVs that we made for the trim sheet. If I just pull up like a cube, I don't know if any of these are the right cube, but so if we have a cube, I believe this is the right one. Yeah. Let's say we're texturing this cube here to our trim sheet. So I want this side part to sort of follow part of my trim, maybe this bit here. And then the top and bottom, I also want them to sort of fit into this bit here. Okay, great. So there's my cube. We'll export that. That's our UV cube. When we look at that in Engine, it's going to look totally normal. See, we have our trim wrapped around properly, and then we have our other faces kind of shoved in there as well. But there's an issue. It's not really an issue on this one, but typically when you have trims like this, we don't have a possibility of baking down a map, right? We can't bake to this because the textures or the UVs are overlapping. This isn't a great example because there's only 6 faces because it's a cube. But let's say this needed to be on this trim now. Right? All of my details here are overlapping, which means I can't use this to bake any kind of individual mesh maps, right? We already kind of knew this going in. That's one of the caveats of using trim sheets. But let's say this prop is really important. But I want to use the trim sheet because I want to make sure that it matches other props, right? Probably this bar, for example, now that we know what size it is and everything, I would realistically go back and merge all these pieces together and have it as one piece for both light map purposes and for UV purposes, just to help with detailing. But the main trim would look something like this UV-wise, which isn't good. So what do? Well, objects can actually have more than one UV map. Kind of a stretch, they can have up to 80. You'd never need that many, but if you could put any kind of information in these UV maps. I've made shaders in the past in Unity where based on each section of offset the UV was, so if it was here, this is 0 to 1 space. If it's here, this is 0-1 to 2 space. It literally changes both the color of the mesh and creates procedural dirt and damage and whether or not it's metallic. So I just had a ton of UV maps and I didn't actually have to UV unwrap anything. It's all procedural. That's an aside, but point is you can do anything with any number of UV maps, which is kind of cool. So we have our trim UV set up here, which we need to be perfectly in line with our trim. I'm going to just quickly go down to UV maps in the data properties tab. And we have our default one, which is fine. UV map, I'll just rename it trim so that we know that's what it's for. And I'll add a second one, and we'll just call this one mask. And this will just let us create a new set of UVs. So by default, when you make a new one, it is going to just copy the existing one, which is why it looks like this. But if I unwrap this now, I've got one set of UVs that's not overlapping and is a proper one-to-one UV. And I've got a second set that works for my trim sheet. This is fine, except Substance Painter, for whatever reason, at least my version. Maybe your version works differently and you can tell it which UV set you want to use, but my version, it's not a thing that exists. So we do have to do a little bit of funkiness here. I'm going to quickly re-export this into Engine, 2UV cube, export. And then I'm going to have to go into, to get around the Substance Painter thing, I'm going to have to add a new Blender add-on. Just in preferences here, I'm going to hit add-ons and search up UV. Oh, sorry, get extensions. UV and UV Maps Plus. I'd highly recommend installing it, even if you're not really planning on doing a 2UV setup, but it is very useful for this. UV Maps Plus, it just allows you to reorganize the UVs, because by default in Blender, you can't change the order of them. I'm going to just take the trim and move it down a slot. So now mask is the primary slot. And I'll export this not into Engine, but just somewhere else. So this is what we're going to use in Painter, but then the maps will still work in Engine because the UVs are in the proper order there. So I'll just go to my source folders here, and I have a folder for exports, and I'll just re-export this cube there. And then just switch the order back. So now trim is back to being the primary one. Okay. Not going to bother saving this, but I'll make a new 1024 is fine. We'll go ahead and find that object, which is in exports. Nope. Source exports. Okay, and you'll see it's giving me the right UVs now to actually create a baked RGB mask. Now, by default, when we're looking at everything, we have our texture set with base color, height, roughness, metallic, etc., etc., etc. I don't care about any of this. None of this is relevant to me right now. I'm just going to axe all of it, because we're going to make our own channels. If I go in here and add a new one, I can actually go down to user channels and just pick user 0, for example, user 1, and user 2. Okay, and I could even do 4 if I wanted to, and I could put the 4th one into the alpha map. So I can now rename these. User 0, you are now dirt. User 1, you are now edge mask. User 2, you are now color variation. Oops. Variation. And user 3, I don't know if I need to stick something else. I could add like roughness variation for an extra layer of detail. Okay, so dirt, edge mask, color variation, and roughness variation, those are my new masks. And these ones, by default, they're all 32-bit. We don't need all that. I'm just gonna make them linear 8-bit and make sure that color channel is checked off. And then from here, we could do all of our normal stuff when we're texturing an object. This is just a cube, so pardon my example, it'll be pretty limited. I'll bake mesh maps, but they won't really do anything. And then just to sort of help it out a little bit, I will duplicate this and just kind of give it a little bevel. Call it the high poly. Call it the high poly. Don't mesh names. Just kind of go. Okay, but now we have all of our edges and baked mesh maps that we normally would, and we can start to work on generating our masks. So just like if you're working in Substance Painter, right, the whole goal for us is to make those masks, things like that. I want to make a mask for dirt and everything, but I'm not exporting the textures, right? The trim sheet's handling the textures. I just want to tell Unreal that this is where my dirt should be, or this is where my edges are, or this is where my color variation, roughness variation should be on this model specifically. It's not tied to the trim, it's tied to the model. So now that we have all those, I can hop in here, change my channel to something like dirt here. I'll add a new fill and a new group for dirt. Drag my fill in there, and then tell my fill, you'll notice that all of my normal channels are gone and they're replaced with my new ones. So I'll say, hey, this fill is for dirt, and I want it to be black for the base, and then do the exact same thing we normally do. I'll add a black mask, I'll add a generator, and I'll add dirt. And again, it's still not going to work really because it's a cube. But let's say that this is good, right? I'm still looking at my dirt channel. This is my dirt mask now. This is going to get exported into Engine, and then in Engine in the shader will tell it everywhere that's white on this dirt mask, that's where we should have dirt on our model. So one more thing I want to do just to make it more obvious that it's working is I'll just multiply in, I did this in async too, the exact same thing. I'm just going to multiply in some other gradient. Whoa, what's going on? Okay. There we go. I'm just going to multiply in a gradient. Okay, that's not what I clicked on. Well, I've already got my dirt, so I don't need to do that. And I just want to increase this and change the rotation so it's going upwards. So now we're kind of getting this gradient upwards. You can ignore the top part. But we're getting this upwards gradient of dirt as if this had been left on the ground or something, and now dirt is built up around the bottom of it, which is fairly reasonable for an object like this. And we're just making sure that everything here is only affecting our dirt channel. So that's affecting dirt, great. We can go ahead and make a new folder now. Fine. And this can be our edges. And we'll just do this, switch, same process. Fill, this one's just edges. We need a black base to get started. Add gen, just edges, and this is going to be based on our curvature. There's our edges. It's a little intense. We'll kind of calm it down a little bit and kind of blur it. Okay, there's our edges. Done. Color variation, roughness variation, exact same thing. I'm not going to bore you with that. We'll just get started with this as it is. Next, what I would do is go to File, More Save Options, and you're going to save this as a template. You see, I've already got one that's basically the exact same setup for an RGB mask. But this way, you don't have to come in every single time and change all your channels and everything. When you hit File, New, as long as that's in your templates folder, if I scroll down here, you'll see that under My Assets, the RGB mask option is already there. So you can quickly just make a new one for a new model. So RGB mask is already there. The last thing we have to do is actually create a new export setting. So by default, export setting, again, we're dealing with our own data here. We made this data format up. It's not real. So if I go to export my textures, okay, we'll make sure to set this to our engine path, same as always. I don't know why it keeps linking me to this one and not the actual thing, but that's fine. textures, cube RGB. It's close enough. Select. Under output template, no matter how long you scroll around, you're not really going to find anything that works for this. So we're going to have to create our own export template. So under output templates, I'm just going to go ahead and press new. And you'll see down here I get new export preset. We can change this and we can call it RGB mask export or something. Okay. I would normally just call it RGB mask, but I already have that, so it would freak out. And then we can tell Painter which types of maps we actually want to export. And I want to channel pack these. I don't want to export 3 individual textures because that's 3 times the memory usage for literally no reason. They're all just linear 8 grayscale textures. So I'm going to export one single R plus G plus B texture, meaning that each channel is calculated individually. And then we can actually come in here and find our channels being user 0, user 1, and user 2. Actually, we set this up with 4, so let's do all 4. User 0 is going to be our dirt. I can throw this in anyone. I'm just going to throw it in the red channel. And then from user 0, because it's a linear channel, we can just say, hey, put the gray in there. User 1 we'll put in the G channel. This is our edges. So we'll have that in there now. User 2. Wow. That one also goes into our map. And then user 3 goes into alpha. No surprises there. And here we have our output mask. It's called RGB alpha. I'm just going to use the little swizzle thing here. So we can go $mesh underscore RGB mask. Okay. It automatically saves. So once you're done typing everything in, you are good to go. So RGB mask, I'm good. List of exports, you'll see it exports with the name of my object, the material name, and then the texture. Let's change this to our RGB mask. Sorry, it should just be the name of the mesh and then RGB. Okay, and it's just one texture, that's all we need. Export. Save. Coming back to our scene here, now I've got our cube. Let's go ahead and create a instance of the RGB mask. So this is mi underscore cube, I guess, RGB. We pop that on. So everything here looks so far so good. It's got the proper trims set up. But we want to add that extra layer of detail. In the actual master material for this, you'll see that what we're doing with this is we're literally taking each one of those channels and just lerping some extra data on top. So in this case, I'm not doing much to the dirt. I'm literally just using it for color and roughness. So our roughness map is getting passed into a lerp. Our alpha is coming from our RGB mask. And then our dirt roughness value is literally just a scalar here that lets us change everything within that RGB mask, right? And then same thing for the color. I just have the color being passed into alert, and then the alpha also comes from that RGB mask and it's getting put on top of the existing color. So not too complicated. I can do the exact same thing with the green channel here. So let's just take the green channel out. I'm going to add a linear interpolate. The green is going to be our alpha, and remember the green channel is our edges, right? We made that up. It could be whatever we want, but we made it our edges. I'll take the new base color, post dirt. We'll call this edge color, and I'll just multiply this in, or add it to the lerp on top of the other noise that we did, or the other base color stuff we did. Okay, you can see it shows up quite viscerally in our example, but our example object doesn't have any proper masks or anything, so that's why. So let's go back to our cube now here, and we can pretend this is a very important prop. With our mi cube RGB material, we can start to actually tweak all of these settings. So our trim sheets are going to be the exact same, right? I still want this object to use this trim sheet, but what I am going to change is I'm going to go ahead and find my appropriate RGB mask, which is right here. Just hit save. And then the other thing we need to do is tell Unreal that this is in fact an RGB mask. It looks kind of stupid right now because we don't have anything in our alpha value channel, but it should show up in our other channels. So over here, default, set this to masks, no RGB, now it's RGB. You can see our edge color here is now picking up where that mask was created. So I could change this. I could tweak the edge color. I could tweak the effect of it. And now I've got individual mesh detail on top of a trim sheet without having to actually go through and make individual textures for it. But this way I can break up that trim sheet even more, which is what this is all about. So I'm getting a little bit of an issue with the actual dirt masking. I think when I changed some of these, I forgot to make sure to set them to the proper channels here. Yeah, so these don't belong here. Just fix this really quickly just so we can see what it's actually supposed to look like. Okay, there we go. So just edges, just edges. Dirt still looks like dirt. Okay, there we go. So I'll tweak the dirt color to make it something incredibly obvious so we can actually see it. And as we look, we can see the red is where our dirt is. The curvature mask is obviously incredibly intense because I didn't tweak it, but that's the idea. So start to think about all the different props in your scene and where you might need to use some of these instances. Right? When we use so many tiling textures and repetitive trim sheets, things all start to look the same. And this is the only real option we have to start breaking up all of that monotony. So this stuff is really important. It's really going to help your scene stand out. If you do want to start winning things like Ubisoft Next, it's very important you start doing this stuff because that is what they do in industry and that's what you're going to be expected to do. The main one in that aspect is going to be the material blending. That's probably the first and foremost thing you got to learn about. And then the second one being the RGB mask for those important props. So any questions about that kind of stuff? I can help you now if you do. If not, there's also the rest of the information in the async lecture. Okay. If we're all so far so good, then the last thing I want to do here is just talk a little bit about getting our proper shots and everything for submission and making these scenes. Okay. I'm just going to close everything here so it quits lagging my computer a little bit. And the last little bit we have is adding things like dollies to our camera to just finalize our renders. So underneath our cinematic settings, we also have things like cranes, camera rails, rigs, everything that we can actually use to control our camera in a repetitive fashion, or not repetitive, but a reproducible fashion. So by default, I'm just going to grab a rail here. And if we kind of move it over, it is quite literally just a rail that moves back and forth with a camera on it. So just like any kind of like dolly zoom, basically, you can do using this. And if you've noticed in a lot of Ubisoft Next submissions, they just have this slowly moving in camera because it adds just more dynamics to the scene without any real work, right? It's just one of these rigs. So I'm gonna get the rig set up, put it roughly where I think makes sense. We'll maintain our kind of key shot here. I'll leave this where it is, but that backup we had from earlier, I'm pretty sure I don't really need it right now. So this backup, I'm actually just going to parent it to my rail and then just zero out the location so that it actually shows up where it's supposed to. And I can turn this on. Okay. Same thing for now. I don't really need the rotation. I'm going to leave it though because it looks fine. And we'll just kind of move this into place where we think a nice kind of shot would go. Oops, not that, to move the whole rail. So I'll move this whole rail and see the camera kind of moves with it. Okay. And then if I start to move the current position on the rail, you'll see it's going to move my camera. Nothing too crazy, but just adding this little bit of motion to your shots can help a ton. You can also lock the orientation of the camera to the rail if you don't want it to rotate or anything like that. But for me, let's just say this is good enough. I've got it kind of dollying in to this dude standing here behind the counter. Okay. Now you're just going to want to go through and add a level sequence. So this is what it's going to allow us to actually animate that rail to go back and forth. So a new level sequence, we'll call this camera dolly or just bar dollies. And throw this into some folder that makes sense. Don't have anything yet, so we'll just call this one sequences. Okay. Once you've created a new sequence, you'll have access to the sequencer, which is not surprising. And the sequencer works just like any timeline in any other program, be it Blender, Unity, whatever. It allows you to add some kind of keyframe to some kind of object or property. You can see now that I have the sequencer added. These little keyframe indicators have popped up. So I can say, hey, at frame 0, let's add a keyframe to our sequence. I'm going to close my content browser. I can say, hey, by frame 45, maybe, let's have this be at 1. And then add another keyframe. And as I go about my sequence, you'll see that it follows it. Okay. After that, you can render the sequence to something. Movie output. The render is in real time when it's actually recording it, so you don't have to worry about that too much, because for Ubisoft Next, the submission requirements is it needs to be in real time. And you continue to add multiple cameras and other cuts and things like that. So if I create a new camera here, I can set this up the exact same way, make it a different shot of my scene, and then set up camera cuts so that it jumps between the cameras in my recording, and I can record it all at once, or you can record your scene individually and stitch it all together in Premiere After. Either way really works. The main thing here is we just want to get all of this stuff put together. So we can snap back to our backup here, and obviously the rail isn't visible in the final, but our shot is here. Cool. That's pretty much it. That's basically it for today. Hopefully that gives you most of what you need to finish the assignment. When I come back next week, it'll be mostly just polishing most of what's left up. It's a lot of little nitty-gritty things. Next week I might show you how to make decals and things like that we can apply. Maybe I want like a huge crater of damage somewhere along here that painting in with the other texture doesn't do, so we can create that kind of thing in Blender next week probably. So yeah, next week's going to be just absolutely fine polishing everything. The scene, again, I'm going to finish it between this week and next. So it'll look different. Try working on what you can. I'll end the recording there, though. That's pretty much it. Yep, Lucas?
So those camera dollies, do they only go in a straight line? Or can you curve them, change your trajectory?
These ones, the rails specifically, are meant for going in straight lines.
So if I want to do a curve, I have to just animate kind of positions manually?
Nope, you can use a different type called a crane.
Oh, okay.
They do have straight up, like, literally a proper camera crane. Yeah, like everything that's you can do rendering wise for the cameras is based on reality. So the rails and cranes, they all work the way they do. The dollies are just easier shots though. Any other questions? Cool.